Welcome to Module 6. We're going to be covering user identity and device security. It's a shorter module, but a very important one nonetheless. And we're going to be talking about protecting user identities and as well as the device security. And these are, as Tim mentioned in a previous module, the almost forgotten parts of cloud security. So we'll be talking about those and the importance of them and how to protect them. And so I wanted to start this one with a customer who won't be named. And they were targeted by an attacker, and that attacker's goal was to redirect funds. Part of this customer's business was to transfer funds between various accounts with some of their customers. And the attacker effectively targeted their users through a couple different methods, through phishing attacks as well as brute forcing the accounts that had weak passwords. And they weren't trying to gain administrative control in this particular case. They were trying to take over either user accounts or to trick the users into directing the funds to the attacker's accounts rather than to the legitimate accounts. And so what we observed here was that they were created a fake logon page that looked like the organization's ADFS page, and they were also performing brute force attacks on weak passwords because the organization had a weak password policy. And so some of the users were indeed fooled by realistic looking logon pages and presented their credentials to them, so they lost a few accounts that way. And they also had a number of users that were compromised because of weak passwords. The organization had a very weak policy. It was, I don't remember exactly, it was 6 or 8 characters and no complexity required, if I recall correctly. And so it was a weak policy. And it was exposed to the internet via the Federation during the Office 365 project. And so it just illustrates how important it is, and this organization almost lost a lot of money. They did not lose a significant amount, but they almost lost a lot of money. And that it just illustrates the importance of making sure that that basic hygiene that Tim mentioned earlier is absolutely followed for both the accounts and identities as well as the devices as well. So when we look at users and devices in the context of really all security, but specifically cloud security, they're ultimately on the front line of the battle, and they're the ones that are exposed, that are browsing the internet, they're checking email. These standard user accounts and devices are the exposure point in a lot of cases. Websites are another potential one, but the users tend to be where the adversaries are targeting to get their beachheads, to get their entry points into an organization, and ultimately, those users and devices in your organization collectively have access to all of your organization's data. It doesn't mean that any individual one has access to all the data, but collectively, all together, they do. So they are extremely important in aggregate to protect, although you do have to assume breach and assume some of them will be compromised. And we have seen in some of the sophisticated attacks, like the one I just mentioned, is that the users are directly targeted, and they don't go through the admin accounts, which is the most common one that we see in the incident responses. But we do see some sophisticated attackers that go after the particular users they want, whether they buy keywords and serve up malware as part of their targeted advertisement or targeted malvertisement, I guess you'd call it. But we do see sophisticated users targeted through a number of means, through phishing and malvertising and the like. And it is important to understand that after we get the administrative control under good positive control of the defenders, that it's likely the attackers will move into user space, the ones that aren't already there, and targeting those specific users and devices that are of interest. And we are also seeing just increasingly sophisticated attacks against all types of devices. And when we say devices here, I just want to clarify, we are talking about both, full-fledged Windows PCs as well as mobile devices, and that's that whole category. So when we look at the user identity and device security, it's very similar to what we've already talked about in the administrative module. Strong authentication is definitely preferred, and the same kinds of strong authentication we covered in the administrative model, whether it's the new Windows 10 features or multi-factor or your traditional smart card or one-time password type approaches. You want to manage those trusted and compliant devices. And there's a couple of resources that we're going to be talking about in just a little bit. Educating and empowering and enlisting the users. And you'll notice that our language in this area, it's really intended to drive some new thinking. Because in many organizations we see the security team in many cases viewing the users as purely an obstacle to their objectives, or they view them as just simply a liability. And there's a lot of opportunity, we believe, in that space to really find ways of engaging users to reduce the risk, to engage them in helping detect risks. If you look at how airports and physical security handle it, frequently you'll say, if you see something, say something, where the users are actually being used as a detective controls. Now, not every user in an airport is going to find something, but if 1 out of 1 million passengers detects a suspicious activity that saves a plane, all that effort is worth it. And so there's a consideration for, can we apply that into the electronic world as well, and not only to help the users be good stewards of your data and protect it, but also to use them to the security advantage. And then, of course, monitoring for account and credential abuse and finding anomalous patterns. The nice thing about humans is we're pretty habitual, and we tend to follow a fairly repeatable pattern of activities, and so detecting anomalies is something that machine learning can help with to identify a potential unusual security activity. So we've talked about the strong authentication already, and like I said, multi-factor and the traditional forms, as well as the phone factors and the new and emerging ones in Azure Active Directory, as well as some of those Windows technologies around Microsoft Passport, Windows Hello, and Credential Guard can also help significantly for protecting those user accounts. Managing the trusted and compliant devices. There are a number of different technologies that can help with this, notably applying security updates quickly. That's an absolutely critical thing to do. Not only the operating system, but all the applications. The more that you're able to apply those updates quickly and reduce those delays, the less chance that an adversary has of essentially getting a free ride or a free pass by using a known exploit. For pre-Windows 10 operating systems, there's a technology called Emmet, which has largely been integrated into Windows 10 that helps mitigate the exploit techniques that we see out there. And this is very much in line with what Tim Raines was mentioning earlier, in that we're increasing the cost of the adversaries to be able to successfully exploit a vulnerability by making it extremely difficult to use the techniques if they do find a security vulnerability. And then from a configuration compliance standpoint, and this is mostly referring to Windows PCs, both servers and clients, Security Compliance Manager, SCM, is the way we distribute the security baselines and the recommended security configurations for Windows through group policy. And so that's a great way to get your configuration set according to Microsoft recommendations. And so Security Compliance Manager is a great resource in that space. And then, like I said, we definitely want to educate and empower users, as I mentioned earlier, the why, the what, the how, and we want them to understand what, why they need to behave in a secure way, what they need to do to be secure and to do the right thing, and then how to do it and how not to do it. And so that gives them a very clear sense of that full chain of what's expected of them. And But we also want to look at enlisting those users. Is there any way that we can use them to actively decrease our security risk or actively increase our security capabilities? And it's definitely an area that's worth exploring. There's a little bit of work in the industry in this space, but it is something that we need to look at heavily because it is going to be a current or future battleground that we will be facing off with adversaries. And then, of course, some technologies like the Azure AD logs and the anomaly detection provide a lot of opportunities, as well as traditional SIEMs, security information and event management solutions, or SIEMs, depending on how you like to pronounce it. Alerting unusual activity and applying machine learning and the latest technology to that and the analytics is a great opportunity for identifying those kinds of anomalies that need to be investigated and remediated. And so the key takeaways here is you just want to strengthen those authentication assurances. You want to protect those devices against compromise by following configuration standards and implementing the standard anti-malware as well as the exploit mitigation technology. You want to be able to measure that device trust so that you have that good information to enable good security decisions. And you want to be able to monitor the users and devices for anomalies so that you can investigate and remediate. And that again goes back to that assumed breach, because these guys, these devices and these users are on the front line, and you have to assume that any one of them might be compromised at any moment, so you want to apply that scrutiny to be able to detect that. And that is the end of Module 6, and hope you'll join us for Module 7.